Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This should be the fourth video in the series on Chapter 3, Bioenergetics, and probably the shortest one too, because you just take the last video on photosynthesis and run it backwards, you got cellular respiration. All right, good video. Bye, guys. I wish it was that easy, but no, we actually got to do this. So let's get the notes going and dive into cellular respiration. All right, so cellular respiration, as I said, this is just photosynthesis backwards. Why are we doing it backwards? Because plants did photosynthesis in order to store energy. So we need to undo that in order to get the energy. That's cellular respiration. And just like photosynthesis, I started with a chemical equation. So take a look at cellular respiration's chemical equation and see if you can come up with anything that's similar or different. Recognize anything? I'll give you a second. Give up? Well, you may have noticed that the substrates in photosynthesis are now the products of cellular respiration. And the products of photosynthesis are now the substrates of cellular respiration. And that's right, guys, it is absolutely reversed. Right? So why do we do that? Like I said, photosynthesis needed to use carbon dioxide and water to put them together to store energy. So in order to get the energy, we are going to undo that. We are going to separate the glucose and get the original pieces to get the energy out. So taking a look at this, how does this happen? Long story short, this is the glucose that the plant made. We ate that. That was in our dinner last night. And oxygen that we breathed about a minute ago, specifically 6 oxygen molecules, right? O2 is what we breathe, and we need about 6 of them for every glucose. That's one glucose right here. And the simple explanation of it is I'm going to put this oxygen in here, which is going to separate the carbon from the water. Right? That carbon reattaches to the oxygen. So carbon, O2, carbon, O2, CO2, carbon dioxide. And we have 6 of them. And we are left with 6 waters over here. All of this takes place in the mitochondria. You may recognize that from chapter 1. I may refer to this as the powerhouse of the cell. That's why this is known as the powerhouse, because we are breaking open this glucose in order to get ourselves some ATP. That is our energy. This is our energy factory. So since that is so important, let's talk about the structures of this mitochondria. Right? It has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. You may remember I said last video that all the really important organelles have 2 membranes, right? That's just a good hint of how relevant it's going to be. And weird thing, the inner membrane is actually bigger than the outer membrane. It's like you took a really big balloon and stuffed it inside of a really small balloon. There's a reason for that, because the chemical reactions taking place happen on this inner membrane. So the more of this membrane material you have, the more chemical reactions you get to have, and then the more energy you get. And then the matrix is just this liquidy goop floating around. That's where the molecules are floating around trying to get there. So that liquid is just so the molecules can get where they need to go. What is the role of the mitochondria? Like I said, it is the powerhouse of the cell. Cellular respiration takes place here. That is where we are going to transfer energy. Transfer it where? Well, it's in the glucose. Where's it going to go? Oops. It's going to become ATP, which is what we use for our body. Right? Energy that's in the glucose will transfer to ATP so that we can use it for our body. So cellular respiration, 2 different things are happening here. The chemical energy in glucose becomes a different chemical energy in ATP. Or that chemical energy becomes body heat. Right? One or the other. When every time you make ATP, you also accidentally make body heat. It's a good thing. It's a happy accident. The cellular respiration, what we care about though, is the ATP part of it. And it is going to happen in 3 parts that we need to know about. It's actually going to happen in a whole bunch of different steps that we do not even have time to go over. So I'm lumping it into 3 different sections. Glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. So let's start with glycolysis. That is going to actually happen outside of the mitochondria. That's our first step here. You remember in chapter 1, I may have told you a story, I don't remember if I did, about where the mitochondria came from. If I didn't, I'm saying it again now. Once upon a time, the mitochondria was not an organelle. It was actually its own cell. It was just a prokaryotic cell, which means the eukaryotic cells that make us up didn't have a mitochondria. This is way back in the day of single-celled organisms, like multicellular organisms like us didn't exist yet. And these single-celled eukaryotes had to get energy on their own. They didn't have the mitochondria to do it for them. So what they would do is take the glucose, break it in half, and get a little energy out of it. Well, the cool thing is that still happens today. Your cells are still getting their own energy by breaking glucose in half. We call that glycolysis. And then those broken halves are then going to go inside this mitochondria. That's what this picture is. The broken pieces of glucose we call pyruvic acid are going to go inside this mitochondria and then get further broken down to get more energy. And we call those steps the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. I'm going to lump these two things together for ease. Now, if I were to actually separate them out and talk about all the individual steps involved in each one of these things, it could honestly take me a week and a half to teach you everything. We don't have time for that. In the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, these are both taking place in the mitochondria. This is where the glucose halves, that pyruvic acid that naturally broke in half, they're going to go into the mitochondria, meet up with the oxygen that you've been breathing, and the enzymes are going to make sure that they react with each other and get broken down even more. And this is going to be a long series of a bunch of individual chemical reactions that we are not going to go over every single individual step. But just so you know, the Krebs cycle is going to create a little bit of ATP, and that little bit of ATP is then going to be used to charge the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is this big factory of ATP production. So all of this energy is going to get released, and all of these different chemical reactions are going to go into ADP. And then the chain is going to put another phosphate on top of that, turn it into ATP, and you got your body's energy. So let's break that down a bit easier now. Glucose breaks in half, a little bit of energy. Those halves go in the Krebs cycle, a little bit of energy. All the different pieces from here go into the electron transport chain, and you get a lot of energy, a lot of ATP come out. 38 ATP molecules per one glucose by the end of this whole thing. So our final products, we have, like I said, ATP, because that's what we wanted. That was the point. And water and carbon dioxide. Why? Because that's what the carbohydrate was made out of. Okay, so that is chapter 3, bioenergetics. Then do yourselves a favor, go in Google Classroom, see if I left you any kind of work to do, and I will see you in the next chapter.